Constructing the Mind-Controlled State by Philip Jones. 1068. The mass mind control of a population can be defined as the sophisticated exercise of control by utilizing the ability to keep people oppressed yet contented. The Tavistock Institute for Human Relations, 1954. The Hive. Visiting Denmark and living in Denmark are two totally different states of mind. To the visitor, it is indeed a green and pleasant land, small and tidy with an apparently happy and welcoming populace. One overlooks the small things, the little irritants and peculiarities because one is on vacation. It is when one lives permanently there that those same small things, little irritants and peculiarities start to beg questions. Why is it that the majority of Danes are all so alike? They dress alike, cut their hair alike, walk alike and talk alike. They use the same phrases time and again, eat the same food, enjoy the same leisure pursuits and live almost copycat lives, with little or no variation on the theme. I accept that this is a sweeping generalization, but believe it to be valid all the same. There are of course exceptions, and to those brave individuals, I give my respect and admiration. How or why they slipped through the net escapes me, but they are in the minority in every sense of the word, and this indeed adds to their splendor. Every country and people have their national characteristics, but in Denmark it goes beyond this. Because again, and I stress here that I am referring to the majority of Danes, the population is phobically conformist and has a profound and deep mistrust of all things and influences of a foreign origin. For those who watched the US TV series, Star Trek: The Next Generation, the collectivist and robotic alien force known as the Borg bears comparison, albeit one which admittedly is rather extreme. Quite a coincidence actually, Borg being a Danish word. Did Gene Roddenberry know more than he was letting on? Danes display a hive mentality, clinging to each other ever closer as the outside world closes in, rupturing their manufactured and protected isolation, and they hold tight to their queen bee, the welfare state, with which they have an almost metaphysical attachment. In this essay, I will present an hypothesis based on my own research, observations and experiences, both actual and circumstantial, and the research of others operating in the same arena, which I believe will show that the intentional mind programming of the Danish people has been underway since the end of World War II. The model totalitarians. The vindication of two of the 20th century's great prophets of doom is at this time of global fracture perversely fascinating. We humans love to prove ourselves imperfect and flawed. The two pessimistic visionaries of the future of which I speak are of course George Orwell and Aldous Huxley. Their respective doom-laden obituaries of the future have already passed into folklore. These two classic nightmares of what very likely awaits us are Orwell's 1984 and Huxley's Brave New World. Straddling the war years between 1939 and 1945, these books have already shown that they were written with the apparent gift of prophecy. Both envisaged a world in which the advance of science produced a new type of ruling class with powers hitherto not possible. Both scripted the final subservience of human beings to a revolutionary hybrid of technological manipulators and political managers. Both works predict a similar end, but it appears that the tenets of a Brave New World model have been applied here in Denmark, where Huxley's novel is required reading on many adult education courses, whereas 1984, which describes the logical conclusion of a Marxist socialist dictatorship, or more correctly in the 21st century a communitarian one, has been adopted in those countries where the population is more likely to revolt and rebel against the encroachment of tyranny, such as in the US, France and the UK, and some of the former Eastern Bloc countries now enmeshed in the EU fascist state. The new totalitarians. There was no reason why the new totalitarianism which had been chosen by the conspiratorial manipulators should resemble the old model of coercive government, which is demonstrably inefficient, and in an age of advanced technology unnecessary. particularly in a relatively controlled environment such as Denmark. In his book, Huxley describes perfectly the architect's goal. He writes, "A really efficient totalitarian state would be the one in which the all-powerful executive of political bosses and their army of managers control a population of slaves who do not have to be coerced, because they love their servitude. For anyone not born and bred in this land, and in possession of a reasonable level of awareness, I am fairly sure they will recognize the parallels with Denmark as it is today." So how was this state of acquiescence to be achieved? Huxley answered this question himself. Brave New World depends on economic security. Without it, the love of servitude is impossible, and in this, we find the foundations of the new Danish model of totalitarianism. Denmark solved the problem of permanent security and abolished it in the main, along with the more obvious modes of social inequality. Many years ago, she has been helped in this by a century and a half of relative peace and isolation, and until very recently neutrality, and by being small and easily governed. Economic security by itself does not necessarily engender a love of servitude. Other conditions are a prerequisite. On the side of the controllers, a thorough understanding of the interaction between economics and power, and on the side of the controlled, an inert submission to authority and reverence for the expert, and in both cases, an aversion to individuality, an instinct for the collective, identification with and the worship of the state, and a preference for government by bureaucrat. Denmark fulfills the above and then some. Danes do love their work. Programming the masses. At this point, it is useful to take a break from Huxley's vision of the future and take a brief look at Orwell's 1984. The Danes have demonstrated the power of that form of semantic manipulation Orwell called newspeak, that is the changing of words to mean something else. For example, whereas in English, to say to someone you believe them to be special or fine is very positive and complimentary, in Danish, both take on negative connotations. Special becomes peculiar and fine implies you think you're better than us. In this way, human thought can be directed, and undesirable concepts eliminated, because the means of expressing them have been removed. As researcher Michael Bailey wrote, in this reality, language is the highway of how we communicate our thoughts. The gradual and intentional erosion of the vocabulary by those who wish to control us, removes the possibility of any undesirable ideas, as without the words to formulate those ideas, we cannot begin to even think them. In the Danish language, freedom does not yet, as it does in Orwell's Ministry of Truth, imply any form of slavery, but it does imply an element of submission to the collective or hive, and effectively, a powerful word in the vocabulary of any opposition has therefore been effectively neutralized. Similarly, it is exceedingly difficult to speak in any but favorable terms of the state, because all the words in that field have become positively loaded in the same manner as special and fine have been negatively so. So how does a conspiratorial state apparatus program a whole nation of people into a condition of accepted servitude and conformity? Through state education, the merged state corporate media, the advocating and promotion of immune system damaging vaccines and drugs such as antidepressants used to clinically adjust nonconformist behavior, along with the purposeful adding of poisons into the food and drink manufacturing process which dumb down and disconnect people from their ability to think for themselves. Add to this the promotion of deviant sexual practices, pornography and erroneous ideologies such as feminism, and you have yourselves a cocktail guaranteed to bewilder and mesmerize a population into thinking exactly what you want them to and behaving accordingly. As I have stated above, my contention is that Denmark and the Danes along with the other Nordic countries have been used as a test zone for the mass programming of whole populations. A laboratory experiment conducted to test and try out those systems to be introduced on a pan-continental scale sometime in the near future. If one wanted to conduct such an experiment, certain conditions would be desirable. Like any worthwhile research site, a level of isolation and insulation is essential. The number of subject specimens needs to be large and varied enough to allow the project validity, but not so large that the possibility of losing control becomes a factor. The subject specimens themselves must have character traits found commonly from within and outside the target zone, yet be malleable enough to allow for sudden and unexpected changes to the program, and as an essential, lacking completely any tendency to rebelliousness and non-conformity. Denmark certainly fulfills the criteria above and can be said to fall within the remit of the described possible scenario. It is located at the northern tip of Europe and has a tradition of relative isolationism. It has a small and compliant population due to many decades of imposed socialist dogma, and a history of bureaucratic government. It has, along with Norway and Sweden, been historically regarded as being on the very fringe of European culture and therefore generally of little interest to the mainstream of European life. But most perfectly, and up until very recently, it has been, and to a large extent still is, highly homogeneous. End of chapter 1. See you in chapter 2. Anonymous Northern Light.